Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 15th of May, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today by video link, we've got Thomson from Tbilisi in Georgia. And hopefully, if technical problems can be resolved at the Damascus end, Vanessa Beeley. She hasn't been able to get on just yet, so we've got a few minutes before Vanessa's segment. So hopefully Vanessa will be able to join us for that. Now, we're going to get started with, well, let's call it foreign interference, because, of course, the news in the UK has been full of Chinese cyber attacks, Russian cyber attacks, and Chinese spying over the last little while, and Britain very excited about foreign countries interfering in British affairs. So this is GCHQ pushing out a tweet saying, speaking at Cyber UK 24 this morning, our director, Anne Keast-Butler, highlighted how China poses a genuine and increasing cyber risk to the UK. And so she was quoted there as saying, in cyberspace, we believe that the People's Republic of China's irresponsible actions weaken the security of the internet for all. So there you go. In the meantime, the Foreign Office called the Chinese ambassador in for addressing down. The FCDO, they said, was unequivocal in setting out that the recent pattern of behaviour directed by China against the UK, including cyber attacks, reports of espionage links, and the issuing of bounties, is not acceptable. And they went on to say the summons followed Monday's announcement that 3 people had been charged with offences under the National Security Act as part of an investigation led by officers from the Met Police's Counter-Terrorism Command. The Foreign Intelligence Service to which the charges relate is that of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. So that's what's been going on in the UK, and lots of noise being made about that in the UK, but which is quite ironic because just a couple of days ago, a documentary was published on Italian media. Here it is. This is all about the murder of Aldo Moro, and others. And so hugely interesting points being made here. So let's just have a quick look at the types of things they're talking about. They talk about a British special committee which planned a military coup in Italy in 1976. So when we're talking about foreign interference and cyber attacks from China and Russia, how does that compare to this? So planning a military coup in Italy in 1976 is the allegation. The plan was dropped following pressure from the United States and was replaced with a different subversive action, including the possible assassination of Aldo Moro in 1978. It includes testimony of Claudio Signorile, who was Deputy Secretary General of the Italian Socialist Party, who said in the course of his interview that Rome was full of British intelligence agents at the time, that Red Brigades had regular contact with British intelligence at the time, and that British intelligence had agents in all political parties in Italy at the time. And the documentary argues that someone outside of the Red Brigades influenced the Red Brigades to kill Aldo Moro because he was revealing the existence of Operation Gladio to his Red Brigade captors. Now, with respect to the question of whether or not Britain was involved or discussing the possibility of fomenting a coup in Italy, well, of course, this has already been admitted, and this is The Guardian talking about that exact thing a few years ago. UK discusses Italian coup to halt communists. And so if we're looking at foreign interference, just briefly look at British foreign interference. And of course, that's what MI6 is all about. So let's put them on the list. Then, of course, we've got the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And I'm highlighting here the Conflict Stability and Security Fund in particular, but also the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development Programme. We've got 77th Brigade, of course. We've got the entire NGO CSO complex. That's non-government organisations, civil society organisations that are interfering in foreign countries. We have BBC Media Action, there to train journalists in the British mould in foreign countries. And of course, BBC World Service in order to propagandise foreign countries. So that's a little bit of that. But if you want to understand a little bit more about what or how the Foreign Office is funding these types of operations, have a look at the UK Column's website, FCDO Spending at fcdospending.ukcolumn.org. And although this is not up to date because the Foreign Office has now stopped publishing the data, this does give an idea of the types of organizations that FCDO money is going into. So, Alex, why are we mentioning this today? Well, of course, you're in Tbilisi, and the question is the issue of foreign interference and new legislation in Georgia to try to prevent foreign interference. And bearing in mind what I've just said, I mean, what are your thoughts on what I've just said, first of all? And we can clearly see why the Georgian government would be interested in preventing this type of activity.
We can, Mike, and let's just split the two halves, as you say. Very briefly then, in the mid-1970s, Aldo Moro, although he was of the Catholic political tradition himself, was planning, and making no secret of it, to bring the Italian Communist Party, which had reformed itself into what's called Euro-communists. They weren't Stalinist anymore, at least they claimed not to be. He was wanting to make them a junior partner in a governing coalition, because at that stage Italy was getting through one government a year and needed coalitions. And that is what shocked the Americans and British. His assassination was breathtaking enough, not least because his widow testified under oath that Henry Kissinger had shortly beforehand threatened him with a sticky end if he didn't change course. But also because the years of lead, as they're called, the anni di piombo, which follow, included spectacularly sized bombings, like the bombing of Bologna railway station, something on a bigger scale than what was being seen in the Northern Ireland Troubles at the time. There are many overlaps of technique as well. So what we seem to be getting here is that Moro and those who have consistently seasoned politicians around him for a long time testified as such. He was assassinated probably by genuinely bad, genuinely left-wing activists. But as has always been hinted, you can search on YouTube for BBC Two Time Watch Gladio to find the long documentary about this from the early 90s. They were SIS or MI6 and Special Forces, British involvement behind that. And they were steering these men. Now, in Georgia, in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, there's been no suggestion yet of British intelligence steering action on the ground militarily, and that, in my experience, has never been part of the discussion except in Russian claims. I've never seen any evidence for it, but you can see the way that the wind would blow and what it would be that would rile up the governing coalition. We'll bear in mind that since the deposal of Mikhail Saakashvili a decade ago now, who is now languishing here in prison, very serious condition actually, in his prison cell, and who was made stateless by the Georgians as well. Since that time, the ruling party, and it hasn't needed a coalition much, has been called Georgian Dream and is accused by its enemies of being stooges for the Kremlin. Now, I covered a bit of it, the run-up to it last week, but after 3 readings on Tuesday morning local time, so very early yesterday, your time, the Foreign Agents Bill became the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So rather than give chapter and verse on what the Act contains, I hope to do that next week. Once the dust has settled, we'll look at the claims that are circulating at the moment now. So here we've got...
Alex, sorry, let me just interrupt you 1 second. I'm really sorry to do that. Look, I just want to check, just before you continue with this report, because Vanessa has appeared. I just want to check we can hear her okay. We normally do these checks before the program, but if we can't hear her, then at least we got a chance to sort that out before her segment. So Vanessa, can we hear you?
I can hear you.
Excellent, super, excellent. That is superb. Thank you very much. Right, sorry to interrupt you, Alex. Please continue.
That's no problem at all, and very reassuring to hear a disembodied voice from Vanessa. I'm sure the image will pop up in due course as well. So let's go on to cover what's happened in Georgia. The Foreign Agents Registration Act is now law. As in most countries, the head of state here, President Salome Zurabishvili, a French Georgian who's very pro-EU, wasn't able to stop it. We'll go straight to the US response here from the Senate. So the two senior senators for this kind of issue, Senator Jim Risch and Senator Jean Shaheen, of the rhyming name, have issued a slap on the wrist already to the Georgians, saying that this is a dark day for Georgian democracy. And they speak of hundreds of thousands of Georgians continuing to peacefully protest. Well, Tbilisi is, well, anyone's guess. The official population is somewhere north of 1 million. It could be nearer 2 by this stage, because half the country, in a population of less than 4 million, lives here now de facto, because they're all looking for work here. But hundreds of thousands in this not very huge city geographically would be hard to contrive. And I would say it's more like in the mid tens of thousands from my personal impression, having been here a couple of weeks. It's the hypocrisy that gets people just straight away. Here, for example, north of the US in Canada, the National Post has been reporting as of last week that the federal government has been putting together legislation to oblige foreign agents to register. I am not suggesting an equivalence of content between the two acts. That's something that needs a fine legal tooth comb. But there are new offences being created in Canadian law, similar developments in Britain, Australia, several continental European countries as well, to oblige people to register as foreign donors and foreign funded agents. We also see that there will be new offences in Canada, such as engaging in deceptive conduct at the direction of a foreign entity with the intent to influence the exercise of a democratic right in Canada. Now we're getting very close indeed to whether or not you give them merit, the claims of the ruling Georgian Dream Party, which got an 83 votes to 30 majority to pass this bill just yesterday. Now, on my Telegram channel, this immediately led to some cynicism. So a gentleman called Andrew, who subscribed to us, and he doesn't mention whether it's the Canadian bill he's talking about, but he says down the bottom there that the very same week that this is happening in Georgia, the West, I think he means Canada, has a bill that would require NGOs and independent media receiving more than 20% of its funding from foreign donors to register as bearing the interests of a foreign power. But my vagueness on this is probably the whole point. It could be any number of Western countries right now. So here is the mop-top recently installed Prime Minister, the latest Georgian Dream Prime Minister, Irakli Kobakhidze. He's given a press conference about having met with the most important US diplomats for this issue, which is Jim O'Brien, the Assistant Secretary of State in charge of this part of the world. Jim O'Brien would be the man who would advise on sanctions against the Georgian Dream leading figures, if necessary. And in that press conference, and we will go now to an excellent website called Civil Georgia, civil.ge, which is, of course, EU-leaning, but provides accurate write-ups in good English. He says he doesn't want the reputation of Georgia with the US to be damaged. It's a slightly bad English headline there, but never mind. And I won't read all of that, obviously. But here's the main thing. When RFL asked whether O'Brien, who is going to be the man who presses the sanctions button on Georgia if necessary, when Kobakhidze was asked whether O'Brien had talked about this, he said, vaguely, I told him many more details about a certain meeting. Who's this Ivanishvili? He's an oligarch who, and this we may be going into an extra time, but an oligarch who came from Russia to Georgia of Georgian ethnicity, who dropped the previous revolutionary president, Mikhail Saakashvili, 4 years into his presidency. And it is claimed by the people now rioting or various kinds of protesting on the streets, who skew very pro-EU and young and student-like, but by no means all of them are. They claim that Ivanishvili has turned this Georgian Dream Party into his puppet and ultimately Russia's puppet. And look at this banner I've put at the top here. Kobakhidze was asked by one journalist, who's this global party of war that your party, Georgian Dream, keeps banging on about? And he said, well, I told Mr. O'Brien behind closed doors in detail what it is, but it's a delicate issue and they're dangerous people. Well, half of Georgia believes that, half doesn't. I'm no overt sympathist with Georgian Dream. They have, against all law and decency, announced that publicly that they are going to create a database of undesirables that, even before you consider EU accession, is a no-go. Right here on this balcony last night, as night was falling, I took a bit of the mood in, and I am a good 20 minutes walk and up a steep hill or two from the main drag, Rustaveli Avenue, where the protests are. But the loudhailer voice was carrying right the way up, and you get this panoramic shot of the city here, where you will see how much the voice of a few, more than a few, but not a majority, of angry protesters is carrying over the whole city. And then, as it got towards actual dusk, I gingerly went down to Freedom Square, the start of Rustaveli Avenue. And from the opposite side of the square, you will see a central column, a kind of Nelson's column equivalent, which is St. George slaying the dragon. The far side of that, behind the flashing lights of the police and even fire brigade who are in attendance, you will hear the angry voices of these guys the evening they realised that they had lost the vote in Parliament. And this is really a Simpsons-level angry rant. The guy you'll hear is actually saying, won't someone think of the children? The next generation needs to have a future. Now, that might give you the impression that the whole city was full of disgruntled people, as Western media and US senators would have you believe. I went to stand 10 yards beyond that, and by the way, another 10 yards beyond that was a whole bunch of police pickup trucks parked out, and I have seen them, up to 8 wide and maybe 50 men deep, standing at that corner to prevent riots. In the last couple of days, wearing their black masks, special force police from the Interior Ministry. But this evening, there wasn't even that. And just, as I say, 10 yards between the street corner where the protest was and the police trucks, you see this much normal life going on. So not everyone is enamored of the protests by any means, and we'll play this bit out silently. You can see how much pushing and shoving was going on when the special forces got stuck in with the protesters. Of course, the people of a Western bent will zoom in on this and disregard the context of what kind of provocations happened before. But it is an intimidating lot, particularly if you see a lot of them out with their masks on. Sometimes they just wear COVID masks, in a sort of thin pretense that they're worried about catching an infection, but really to obscure their identities. Sorry for the inadvertent click there. Now, as I've just trailed, Grant Shapps was asked what His Majesty's government thought about this on the tail end of a Sky News interview. He's by no means an expert in the Caucasus. He's General Secretary of State for War, but he made these remarks.
I wanted to ask about Georgia. At the weekend, to Trevor Phillips, Lord Cameron said, we actively support the Georgian people and we've made clear to the government this bill is wrong. It seems his warning was not sufficient. If the bill passes today as expected, what will be the UK government's response?
Well, look, this is, for those who haven't been tracking this, Russian interference in Georgia, just in the same way as we've seen Russia, in a more aggressive way, of course, go into Ukraine. Putin cannot help but meddle, sometimes militarily, sometimes through using influence in other countries in a way which is not good for this world. It's not good for freedom or democracy. And so we do condemn that influence, and we very much encourage people to resist that influence from Russia. I think they should, not least because, Putin has demonstrated, and not least in Georgia, that he's not good for the world and not good for his neighbours.
So we, quote, very much encourage the people of Georgia to resist. On the streets, that has to mean, doesn't it? Here is some peaceful resistance, some extremely media-savvy signs calling the Georgian Dream Party's members of parliament Judas because they only took a minute to pass the vote. Here is a kind of representative still image or two that I took of the very student-heavy crowd who've come out in EU and Ukraine colours. And in the posh parts of town, you see them all festooned with their EU flags. One schoolchild I saw had been clearly wearing the EU flag that she got for Europe Day a week ago as a kind of cape all week around her book bag. And, by Friday was still doing so when I saw her. So there is a lot of skew towards this. This is fair enough. This is, singing Ode to Joy on May the 9th and all very fun. But there are some, more extreme examples. So here, up against the barricades that the police put up at Parliament, you saw people doing this, at least nominally in the name of the European Union, ramming the police with barricades. And you saw, of course, that the police had to do something about this. So they went out to nab the main protagonists, and of course there was lots of jeering because it was zoomed in on as if this was a random act of brutality, but it was an assault on the precinct of Parliament. I don't think that would be tolerated in many countries. And I stress, just a couple of 100 yards from here, the vast majority, even of downtown, let alone the rest of Tbilisi, is getting on with normal life and preferring to go about its business unconcerned. There's a widespread feeling that these mainly young people are deluded and will not get anywhere, although the Georgian Dream Party is not very popular in Tbilisi itself. Just to wrap up then, a couple more images. This is the kind of police show of force that you see, but it's very, very localized. Here is some jesting by the protester side. They're getting on Reddit. Well, they would. It's a Western social media firm, and they have got a meme where they're claiming that the Georgian parliament is up for sale or for rent for 83 lari a month, probably a reference to the number of MPs that voted for the act. During previous readings of the bill, we saw scenes like this inside the Georgian parliament. And then just finally, because I'm over time on this segment, to point out that, again, those with fluent English on social media have been getting on Georgia threads and saying, I think it's time for us to come out on the street. They're doing what Grant Shapps wants them to do. Should we wait? We can't wait till the election in November because they'll be rigged, kind of preempting the democratic process. And this one is probably an agent provocateur, claiming to be a Ukrainian veteran Maidan protester who's now saying to his Georgian brothers, come on, it's time to get heavy with the Russians, block the military road to Russia, it's your last chance. And many people replied, you're a troll. Even on the protest side. So we'll try to unpack this more in extra time, but I hope I've sketched that a small minority of the country is really up in arms about the Foreign Agents Bill, and the vast majority think there probably is a reason for it, even if they don't like the governing party much.
Brilliant, Alex. Thank you very much for that. Now, let me welcome Vanessa to the programme and give us an update, Vanessa, on Rafah.
Yeah, the hideousness for Palestinians in Gaza continues. And now, of course, in Rafah, which was considered to be the safe area for the refugees from the north and the central areas of Gaza to gather. But it has been targeted heavily by Israel in the last few weeks, despite the shuffling around of Blinken and the head of the CIA, etc., claims by the United Nations that 450,000 refugees have now left Rafah to other areas of Gaza. I'm being told by friends of mine that that's even closer to 750,000, so 3/4 of the 1 million that were taking shelter in Rafah. Ground incursions and heavy fighting continue to be reported in eastern Rafah as well as Gaza City and Jabalia, the refugee camp. Basically, Israel is bombing pretty much everywhere in Gaza right now. These are just some of the images of people already multiple times displaced, moving from Rafah. And if we can just show the video of them basically arriving in the Khan Yunis area, which is where Israel advised them to go. I mean, it should be pointed out that Khan Yunis is basically destroyed. There are very few medical centers or hospitals still operational there. There's no electricity and water. So people are being pushed into rubble, effectively, from Rafah. These are images of the Israeli occupation forces occupying the Rafah crossing. Now, on the left, that appears to be on the Gaza side. On the right, I haven't confirmed it yet, but to me, from my memory of being inside that crossing, it looks very much like the Egyptian side, which would mean that there is some collaboration between Egypt and Israel in the containment of Palestinians inside Gaza. And in fact, this meme or cartoon has been circulating. And if we actually watch a recent video of Egyptian forces attacking a young man from Gaza who attempted to escape without paying the $5,000 that Egypt is demanding, Egypt has made millions from allowing Gazan refugees to leave to Egypt, and is then only giving them a 3-month visa with no work permit. And at the end of that 3 months, nobody is sure what will happen to those refugees that have already left Gaza, whether they will be forced to go back to Gaza, because there are rumors that Egypt will not renew the visas. So let's just have a look at the video of the Egyptian army beating up this young Palestinian. And then, as evidence of the indoctrination of even children in the occupied territories, these are Zionist settler children destroying humanitarian aid that was supposed to be sent from Israel into Gaza. And in fact, what's happening is that Netanyahu is apparently organizing buses to take these demonstrators to the various crossing points where they prevent the entry of humanitarian aid. So any propaganda that is being put out by Israel claiming that they are sending humanitarian aid in is false. So if we can just play the video of the children.
זה אוכל של ילדים מסכנים. הלב כואב. תראו את הילדים. מה זה מנה חמה? לא בריא. יש לי מחבים טובים אחרים. טוב חזק.
Vanessa, just very quickly, whenever you sent that video to us earlier on, Kenny then went and had a look at the situation and was finding just loads of videos from different situations, very similar. So this is not a sort of localized incident.
No, and in fact, if people want to check out the live report by Jeremy Lofredo, which is on YouTube, when he actually embeds himself with the Zionist settlers while they go to prevent the humanitarian aid entry into Gaza. It's a shocking and horrifying live report. I recommend everybody watch it. And of course, so what has happened now is that Gazans are completely enclosed inside Gaza under mass bombing, shelling from the sea, from the air, from the land. And of course, guess what? What we've been talking about all the time, the only exit point now is the US alleged humanitarian court. So the kind of the idea that this will be used to deport those Gazans that survive this operation by Israel is correct, in my opinion.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Now, we'll just move on. There we go. So if you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to support.ukcolumn.org. The options to help us out are there. You could pick some, or share any material you find on the various platforms. Now, many people have been writing in to say, where are you on Facebook? Well, it looks like we're not on Facebook anymore. I think the page is still up, but we have no access to it. I have no explanation as to why, and every effort to get access to it is apparently blocked by Facebook. I'm receiving messages from them saying, we can't help, sorry. So it looks like that Facebook page is gone. We may have to set up a different one. We'll keep everybody posted. Don't forget, not on the list there is our Telegram account. So look for UK Column on Telegram and you'll find us there. If you would like to pick up something from the UK Column shop, you can do. There's plenty there to have a look at. Now, very quickly, Alex, the second part of the interview with Yuri Roska goes out tomorrow.
Yes, I went off to Moldova, a country with many similarities to Georgia, as a former Soviet republic and a very poor and small one at that. And he speaks largely about his political career in part one, which is up on the front page of the website. In the second part, he becomes more of a campaigner against the things that the West wants to do to countries like Moldova. And listen particularly carefully tomorrow in part two to what he says about resisting American and German and EU efforts to force his small country to become a federation, because that's something that we'll be discovering in a moment is also being foisted on the Caucasian countries, Georgia and Armenia, by the pro-EU protesters.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. And a quick reminder that on Sunday we'll be holding a symposium on behalf of International Centre for 9/11 Justice entitled From National Security to Biosecurity. And Meryl Nass and Madhva Sethi will be speaking. Dr. Niels Harrit will also be speaking, Dr. Piers Robinson. So do join us for that at 6 p.m. So the timings on that are US time. So 6 p.m. it starts, 6 until 8 or so. So join us for that if you can. Now, where does that take us? Just wanted to very briefly mention David McBride, a whistleblower in Australia, military lawyer, and whistleblew on, or he released documents that he probably wasn't permitted to under normal circumstances, but the whistleblower rules in Australia are so weak that he has now been sentenced to 5 years, 8 months in prison with no parole available to him until 2 years, 3 months into his term. So he released, the comment on the tweet here is he was the first person jailed in relation to war crimes in Australia, but for revealing them, not committing them. So I just wanted to very quickly highlight that situation, and we'll no doubt have more on that in due course. Now, Alex, let's move on to Armenia.
It's a twofer, Mike. It's the first time in a quarter of a century keeping close tabs on both of these neighbouring countries, former Soviet republics in the Caucasus, that they've both come to the boil at the same time. Some similarities. We can go into more of the nuances in extra time again. But what's happened this time is following last year's loss of an extraterritorial exclave of ethnic Armenians in Azerbaijan, called Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, and the absorption of over 100,000 refugees from there into Armenia, which doesn't really want to keep them, the government doesn't. There's been huge social strain. Azerbaijan, an oil-rich dictatorship, has been pushing now for Armenia to concede some of its border territory in the tri-border area, not far down the road from here, between Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Some border villages in the Soviet era were not marked on the map as part of the Armenian Socialist Soviet Republic, and the government of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has now agreed in a demarcation exercise as part of a peace suit with Azerbaijan to hand them over. Residents of those border villages in the district or the province of Tavush got together with their local archbishop, Bagrat Galstanyan, and marched on the capital, Yerevan. So Freedom Square, Yerevan, and Freedom Square, Tbilisi, are both full of rioters and have been for the last few days. I won't cover it in as much detail as Georgia, but we'll see now a few seconds of a war dance called the Yarkushta, which was danced by students dissenting against the government of Pashinyan and welcoming in these marchers from the northeast when they turned up in Yerevan. They were apparently threatened with suspension for this show of support, but that was later revoked. So here they are dancing or beating the literal war drums. Not everyone, even among the opposition in Armenia, would like Archbishop Bagrat Galstanian, because he has now stood in Republic Square, the other main square there in Yerevan, and said he wants to form a transitional government. Some of his supporters literally walked out on him for that, because they thought this was a ploy to create an insurrection. Meanwhile, though, the Armenian Prime Minister, who's causing all these ructions, has been off in not so sunny Copenhagen, where under the chairmanship of the Dane who used to be not just Danish Prime Minister but also Secretary General of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, he was interviewed, and we'll hear a clip in a moment. So Rasmussen took the stage here on the second day of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit under the slogan, "Dictators need not apply," and the YouTube speech and the whole day will be in the show notes. What did Rasmussen have to say? Well, that is usefully taken apart by an excellent blogger, that'll be in the show notes too, called Money Circus, a gentleman based here in Tbilisi, a British expatriate. And looking at what Rasmussen said in this moment of doubt for Armenian stability, he says what a suitable venue this was held in, the Royal Danish Playhouse. He quotes Rasmussen as saying, "Armenia is a democracy in an incredibly difficult neighborhood. Europe," he means the EU and NATO, I think, "must do all it can to support Armenia's democracy and geopolitical pivot." And he's talking about Rasmussen as a third-rate politician. So there's nakedly here the suggestion that if the EU and US don't like what is happening in Georgia, they sanction the governing politicians and they just flip to Armenia. And as a result of that, you will get the oil flowing through Armenia probably instead of Georgia, and Georgians no longer being given the carrot of nice access to the EU. He goes on to talk about Rasmussen as really wanting to say roll up for the war and surrounding Russia with prickly little troublemakers. And he says deeper down is the giveaway that the Georgian opposition here, not in Armenia, says that they want a decentralized Georgia. Now, both of these countries have very roughly the population and area of something like Ireland. So trying to make a federation out of that, and Yuri Roshka will give the details in tomorrow's part 2, is a recipe for disaster. You're always going to get some regions which go with the pro-Western camp and others that go with the pro-Russian. So Money Circus says that this will be breaking up even the smallest countries, perhaps with the aim of creating hotspots and flashpoints with the long-term objective of breaking up Russia. He then says, and perhaps we'll talk about this in extra time with Vanessa, that it's exactly the same policy that the US has pursued in Iraq and Syria, which is we'll hold on to part of your country and create a very vibrant opposition there, which wants to give it natural resources and human resources straight to the West. He says if a country is no longer entire, he's thinking here of Georgia, Armenia now, but it's happened to Syria already, it can't be retaken by a single leader, whether nationalist, populist or otherwise. What did Pashinyan say on the stage yesterday in Copenhagen? We'll have a listen now. So sorry for the lack of introduction there. This is just the bridge there. This is what the Georgians on the stage in Copenhagen were talking about, linked by Money Circus, and they're all specialists in changing hearts and minds. But we'll now listen to Pashinyan talking about the EU. I apologize if the sound didn't come over very well in that clip. That was a mistake I didn't notice when I was queuing it up. But he was asked, when would you like Armenia to join the EU? He says, right away, this year, and got a big round of applause for it. He's put his foot in it, as Pashinyan, by saying that the Armenians were probably somewhat responsible for the genocide that was brought upon them 100 years ago. And so that's being reported on even by Politico now in the EU. I apologize about the people behind me. I can't do anything about that. And that has brought about a condemnation even by the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, which is suggesting that Pashinyan has really gone too far this time. Again, more in extra time if necessary.
Yes, thank you, Alex. And we will now move on back to the UK in a sense, but also international affairs, because here's the latest from Chatham House. This was published a few days ago. The UK should not rule out sending troops to Ukraine despite Putin's nuclear threats. This is by a guy called Keir Giles, and he is described as Senior Consulting Fellow, Russia and Eurasia Programme. But of course, we know the name Keir Giles because he, of course, was a fairly central character within Integrity Initiative, which was all about, if you remember, the promotion of anti-Russian narratives. So perhaps we need to take this this particular piece in that context. So let's see what he's talking about. Backing down in the face of Russian threats, he said, is the worst option. The UK should join France in using what he's describing as strategic ambiguity. The theatre, he's talking about here the theatre that Russia uses to sort of promote the idea that it was under pressure in some way, that it was forced into the special military operation. That theatre was both diplomatic, with the British ambassador summoned to the foreign ministry in Russia, he said, on Monday to warn of retaliation, and nuclear. So he's ramping up the nuclear threat here. Moscow announced it would be holding exercises involving tactical nuclear weapons in the near future to remind the world yet again that it has them. And he said that Britain's explicit endorsement of strikes into Russia, because Britain seems to be one of the only countries that is supporting the idea of Ukraine striking into Russian territory itself. Britain's explicit endorsement of strikes into Russia could also have been presented as a consequence for Russia's attacks against Europe, and with the promise that more would follow. What's more, explicitly allowing Ukraine to strike Russia with British weapons as well as its own opens up other possibilities for targeting Russia's ability to wage war. So quite an incredible position to come from the main think tank within the British establishment, I suppose. Vanessa, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but if not, we'll move on to what's happening, what's going to happen to Gaza next.
Yeah, let's move on. Sorry, my thoughts are not very gathered after the disaster trying to sign on in the beginning.
Yes, okay, no problem.
So yes, let's move on to Netanyahu's dystopian vision for post-war Gaza. Now, this report, the full report that I looked at in depth and actually translated the PowerPoint presentation linked to this report that was given to members of Netanyahu's administration back in December. It was reported in the New York Times. It was also reported in Hebrew media and in a number of other media in the West also. And basically, so it's talking about sharing power with Arab states, particularly those that have normalized relations with Israel or are on the verge of normalizing relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords that, of course, were introduced under the Trump administration. So the vision basically is to go from the Gaza that has effectively been destroyed and decimated by almost 7 months of bombardment and genocide by Israel into what you see on the right-hand side for me, this kind of Dubai, Singapore type area with, of course, if you see the gas exploration platforms off the coast of Gaza, which, of course, is related to the Gaza gas reserves that Palestinians have never been able to lay their hands on, thanks to Israel. Now, the New York Times analysis is, I have to say, a very clean version, very superficial. What it actually says is that under the proposal, the Arab-Israeli alliance working with the US would appoint Gazan leaders, we'll come on to what that actually means, to redevelop the devastated territory devastated by Israel, overhaul its education system, we'll also come on to that, and maintain order. After between 7 and 10 years, the alliance would allow Gazans to vote on whether to be absorbed into a united Palestinian administration that would govern in both Gaza and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. In the meantime, the plan suggests the Israeli military could continue to operate inside Gaza, so for the next 10 years, basically. Now, I covered this report quite extensively at my Substack. Basically, there are 3 phases to the plan. First of all, to cleanse northern Gaza of Hamas, a plan which is certainly not successful. And in the future, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Bahrain, Jordan, and Morocco will be given control of humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip, but only to safe areas. Now, the safe areas are for selected Palestinians that basically abandon any kind of resistance ideology and can be normalized with Israel again under the Abraham Accords. Phase 2, Israel to maintain overall security responsibility, which means military rule, oppression, apartheid, and imprisonment and torture and ritual abuse of Palestinians, as we have seen for the last 75 years. Palestinians from Gaza will form the Rehabilitation Authority, which will manage the safe areas, ghettos basically, and ensure they are free of radical resistance ideology. So comparisons were made in the report to the Marshall Plan, which of course, in my opinion, should be ridiculed when taken in the context of the protection and renaissance of Nazism under US-UK protection in the West since the end of World War II. And the final phase, the selected Palestinians will govern areas of the Gaza enclave and will join the Abraham Accords. It is expected that the Nazi elements in Netanyahu's coalition regime, such as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, will be opposed to any kind of Palestinian rule, even, if you like, indoctrinated, reprogrammed Gazan rule. Now, you can freeze this and read what are the supposed advantages to these countries. So you have Israel, the United States, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Gazans, as they're claiming, and Morocco, who are to be involved in this plan. However, many of those countries are putting out staunch denials of any involvement, and incentives will be put in front of the people who have been starved, bombed, deprived, and terrified on a 24/7 basis inside Gaza, of course. Free trade zones in Gaza and Al Arish in the Sinai, in Egypt, trade with Europe, the US and Gulf states, rail links, energy and regional infrastructure development. However, as I ask in my article, will the Palestinians be allowed to leave their so-called safe areas, or will they continue to live in militarized and segregated ghettos while all of this economy and trade goes on around them? The development of the Gaza gas reservoirs will finally happen, but will be of no benefit to Palestinians, of course. Solar fields are proposed in the Sinai, which will provide energy for regional desalination facilities after years of Israel bombing and destroying Gaza's desalination capabilities and depriving Gaza of the energy to run the plants. Electric vehicles will be manufactured in the northern Gaza Strip. Factories will be established in these areas and in the occupied territories neighboring Gaza. Raw materials will come from Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. Cars coming off the production line will be shipped to Europe from the port at Al Arish. The rebuilding of Gaza will require raw materials and services from the Gulf states, which will create for them demand and opportunity for foreign investment. Another image of the proposed post-war Gaza. And from the New York Times, a claim that the UAE and Saudi officials said that the new proposal would not secure the involvement of Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, particularly because it stopped short of guaranteeing Palestinian sovereignty and would permit continued Israeli military operations inside Gaza. The Saudi government has said it will not normalize ties with Israel unless Israeli leaders take irrevocable steps towards creating a Palestinian state. However, this is an article in Foreign Policy from just after the Iranian attack on Israel on April the 13th. Arab countries have Israel's back for their own sake. So let's see what they're arguing in this article, which actually I do agree with. Last weekend, there was a lot of commentary on social media and elsewhere expressing amazement at a new Middle East in which countries of the region coordinated an effort to thwart Iran's attack on Israel. There is something to be said for that. But what's more amazing when one takes a step back is that war has not actually changed the region that much. Regional governments still hate and fear Iran, harbor no particular commitment to Palestinian justice, and want good relations with Israel and desire American leadership. And also to come back to that idea of Gaza as a trade and economy hub, of course, it would be at the center of the IMEC, the Indian, Middle East, European corridor, which we have discussed previously. So it's very clear from this, and in my opinion, these plans are not new. These plans were put together some time ago, if not years ago, and Israel and the US and the normalized state see an opportunity now to, one, resolve the Palestinian issue by giving Palestinians some degree of safe areas inside Gaza, while building the Dubai of the future inside Gaza, profiting from the gas and profiting from the position of Gaza geographically as an economic and trade hub. So not anything new, in my opinion. This has been in the pipeline for years, and now they're exploiting the genocide that is ongoing in Gaza to present the roadmap.
Was there any indication, Vanessa, given about when this PowerPoint presentation was delivered to Netanyahu? Because, of course, what springs to my mind is his General Assembly speech a couple of months ago, which sort of came out of nowhere and well, in fact, it must be 6 months ago now, sprang out of nowhere and was completely out of context, it seems. So do you think this had already been delivered to him at this stage?
Well, the plan was actually, the PowerPoint presentation and the plan were given to him in December. But I think it's likely that this plan was in the pipeline for even longer than 7 months, because I think he gave that speech at the UNGA shortly before the 7th of October, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And what he was actually talking about was the IMEC, the Indian, Middle East, European corridor. So clearly, all of this project, in my opinion, has been in the pipeline for a long time. What October the 7th did was to give Israel the pretext and the justification to actually really start the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza in preparation for launching this project.
And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the involvement of other Arab countries in this, because you said that you think some countries, or you've heard some countries absolutely denying their involvement in this. Is that because they view it being the wrong time?
Yeah, I think, yes, it's they're playing a political game. I think for Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and UAE, let's not forget, has been providing the land bridge to compensate for the shutting down of shipping in the Red Sea by Yemen. And that land bridge crosses through Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. We should also remember the Saudi Jordanian money that's pouring into the Sinai for Egypt, the promises by the US to give Egypt $10 billion for effectively taking in Palestinian refugees, the millions that have recently been given by the EU to Egypt for so-called humanitarian aid that has not been allowed into Gaza. So there is a lot of shuffling going around, but I think Saudi Arabia particularly wants to maintain the optic of pushing for a Palestinian state. But I think further down the road, what they may well do is say, yes, but we've given Gazans the opportunity to live in these safe areas and to profit from the economy and trade that we're building inside Gaza, provided they no longer adhere to any kind of resistance ideology.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Vanessa, for that. Okay, let's come back to the UK then. Online safety. And, an event took place on Friday last week, Internet and Society, the Transatlantic Research Future. And Dame Melanie Dawes from Ofcom was speaking at it. Let's have a look and see what she had to say. She was talking about access rights to the data that lies behind social media operations and other big online platforms need to be strengthened in Britain to allow experts to use the information. So what she's saying is that, there are algorithms operating, but in the meantime, social media companies are gathering a whole host of data which so-called experts don't get access to. It's all commercially sensitive information or stuff that would be sold by the platforms, perhaps, or used by the platforms themselves with their own advertising capabilities and so on. But she wants access to it. She wants academics to have access to it. And, well, does she also want intelligence agencies to have access to it? That's not entirely clear at this stage. But she went on to say Ofcom is trying to build a more data-based way of measuring prevalence of types of harm for different types of users. So she certainly wants to profile the types of information that's being shared in social media and how that's being consumed by various types of users. And she said, I would like as many researchers as possible to be able to join us in the job of working out what is happening and shining lights on things that have been under the bonnet behind closed doors. She said, there's a legal question here about researchers' access to data, which I think is the real potential groundbreaking change here that would allow the broader research community to essentially play on the data and be able to shine a light on all of this. And of course, what's she hinting at? Well, of course, there are data protection laws in place in this country still, but perhaps not for very much longer. We've been talking about this quite a bit over the last couple of weeks and years, in fact. But just to remind you, two key pieces of legislation which were mentioned in the King's speech in November last year. The first one being Investigatory Powers Amendment Bill, which is now passed. So that is an act that allows the gathering of internet data, amongst other things, but also the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. And this is really the key one, because I know you've heard me read this out before, but it's worth just reminding everybody what the long title of this bill is. So the short title is Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, but just consider the scale of this. A bill to make provision for the regulation of the processing of information related to identifying or identifiable living individuals, to make provision about services consisting of the use of information to ascertain and verify facts about individuals, to make provision about access to customer data and business data, to make provision about privacy and electronic communications, to make provision about services for the provision of electronic signatures, electronic seals, and other trust services, to make provision about the disclosure of information to improve public service delivery, to make provision for the implementation of agreements on sharing information for law enforcement purposes, to make provision about the keeping of and maintenance of registers of births and deaths, to make provision about the information standards for health and social care, to establish the Information Commission, to make provision about oversight of biometric data and for connected purposes. And Alex, just very quickly, I'd be interested in your thoughts, because that is such a wide-ranging bill. And the one thing that it doesn't specifically mention there, but which is absolutely included, is the sharing of data with foreign countries, particularly the United States here. But it's such a broad range, a wide-ranging bill. This is something people should really be getting motivated about.
It should. If you look at countries which are ahead in the data digitization stakes, they don't have a single act doing this, but they already do have a single app. Some European countries, some East Asian countries, a number of African countries suddenly have the normalized expectation that you go to a single smartphone app and deal with my government that way. And all of what you read out is then done via the one bridge. But as you say, that's the front end, that the back end is what's done with all this data and can it be hived off. But people might not be aware of that if they just think that it's a provision for making their lives easier.
Indeed. So let's just end with a little quote from Melanie Dawes from the BBC. I think this was BBC Breakfast a few days ago. Let's have a listen to this.
At the moment, teenagers, younger children, up and down the country can experience harmful content on their social media feeds again and again, and this has become normalised, and that has to change. So we are demanding, in what we're saying today, proper age checks, so we know who younger people are.
But of course, if you're going to have proper age checks for younger people, that you're going to have proper age checks for adults as well, because how do you identify whether somebody is a younger person or not? So we'll talk about a bit more about that in extra. Alex, let's just finish off with a couple of and finalies.
Yes, the first one's from me, and I thought this was a good capture of the moment by stonetoss.com. We have a kind of a neo-Marxist, maybe one of the agitators you see around in the West these days, saying, actually, communism is about helping people. And a normie is not convinced and says, I disagree. And the first guy says, I am going to ruin your life.
Yes, okay, thank you. And well, I wanted to put this on. This is from Australians for Assange, and it's got, of course, this new portrait of King Charles. The first portrait of King Charles, they say, seemingly burning in hell for not granting Julian Assange a royal pardon among infinite atrocities of the crown. Well, I just wanted to put that in context with an absolutely fantastic little bit of video, which I'm quite sure most people will have seen already because it's going viral on social media at the moment from Oracle Films, but I couldn't resist playing it out because this is the apparent unveiling of this portrait.
And there's as well. It's remarkable actually how it has turned out.
Has it changed that much since you last saw it?
A little bit.
Yeah. I had to put on the extra medals and regalia.
So no doubt we'll be talking about that in extra as well, but absolutely excellent piece of work from Oracle, and I suppose we might describe that as a deep fake. But anyway, we will talk more about that later. Thank you to Vanessa and Alex for joining me today. I hope everybody has enjoyed today's programme. We'll be back in a few minutes for UK Column News Extra. If you aren't joining us for that because you're not a member, please consider joining us. We do need your support, but otherwise we'll see you for the interview tomorrow at 1 p.m. and for the news on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.